going to go through a few kind of strategies on getting students engaged in class. So, one of the biggest questions that I get, of course, from people who are subscribed to the Religion Teacher, people who are members of the Religion Teacher. I should pause for a moment, just a minute. If you hear something in the background, it's because we're getting our kitchen remodeled upstairs. And so just another reason why today has been quite an experience. But I apologize if there's some loud banging or sawing going on. It's just what kind of where we're at today. So anyways, we're going to talk through a few of the ways in which we can get students engaged in class. I know this is for a lot of you the end of the year, but I still think it's a great opportunity to be able to either think back about what we did this year, how we did things, look ahead to the next year, and maybe also think about what can we do for the rest of this school year to really get the kids excited and engaged. And what I'm going to be offering are really simple kind of tactics that work very well. And as I've shared these with teachers and catechists, I've gotten a lot of good feedback about how the first time they tried it, it was kind of a transformative experience, doing things the way that they were doing. So I'm excited to share that with you. Just want to make sure everything's working correctly here. Okay, and then we will get started. So first of all, here's the graphic organizer I would use if I were you. So if, as we'll hear about in just a minute, graphic organizers are kind of the key, I think, to student engagement when they're learning something new. And I think that will be the same case for you. What I would do if I was listening to this presentation, and what I suggest that you do, is kind of have a 3-3-2-3. So if you were going to have a table like the ones you see on the screen here, we're going to talk about 3 mistakes that we often make as religious educators. Then we'll look at 3 tactics, then look at 2 more tactics, and then finally end up with a 3-step lesson plan framework. And we'll look at some specific lesson plans that I've created and offered, and hopefully just kind of walk you through those lesson plans, what I was thinking, how it is ideally going to get the kids engaged, and kind of go on from there. So 3 mistakes, 3 tactics, 2 more tactics, and then kind of a 3-step lesson planning framework. So our big mistakes, what are our big mistakes as religious educators, as teachers, as catechists? Well, in some ways, I think it's worth saying that, it's not really our fault, because so many of us basically learned to teach this way, because this is the way that we were taught growing up. They were the ways that we were learning in college. We went to college or in high school. The model was basically you sit in a desk and you listen and take notes, if that. And so we kind of assume as we become teachers, educators, and we're volunteer catechists, that the way to teach is to teach by speaking. But as we'll find, as you may have found already, that it really, that's not the case, that there's much more effective ways of teaching than just speaking all the time. And that's really the first mistake that I want to introduce to you. The idea is that we talk too much. We're often lecturing too much. And one of the rule of thumb that I use is that basically you should only speak as long as old as they are. So think about how old the kids are. If they're 10 years old, you shouldn't lecture for more than a 10-minute period. And I know that sometimes that can be difficult, but just recognize that in general, kids are not going to be able to pay attention longer than the number of minutes that align with their age. So if you're teaching high school, 15-year-olds, I wouldn't speak more than 15 minutes. That doesn't mean that you're not going to lecture or speak at all the rest of the class, but it just means changing things up a little bit. So you're using different activities in between that are going to, as we'll see later, give the students the opportunity to kind of assimilate and use what they've learned, as opposed to just teaching or listening to what you're saying. The second mistake is that we often assign busy work. And by busy work, I mean we are giving a handout that, like a coloring sheet, or a word search that doesn't have the opportunity to actually answer questions, or kind of it drives me crazy are mazes. When I see mazes in these activity sheets that are being used in class, these are fun. Those are interesting ways to get kids occupied. Like, many of these things are great when I take my kids out to a dinner at a restaurant. They're doing a maze for like a couple seconds, but then they're done with it. There's lots of activities on the back of the menu, but it's not an effective way to learn. Um, we're going to come back to worksheets and how worksheets can be a powerful tool. But if you're looking for worksheets and you're basically want to just fill up the time with coloring, fill up the time with word searches or games that don't require any mental energy, then it's probably a waste of time. And it's not going to keep the kids engaged. It might keep them entertained, it might keep them busy and quiet. And I know we all want quiet, but how do we get them engaged? We want to make sure that we're using activities that are going to spark their attention, their interest, and their minds, if you will. Mistake number 3 is basically something that I used to do when I first started as teaching. And I know a lot of the teachers that still, early on do this, and even later on do this, is just reading in class. Of course, the main tool that we have as religious educators is the textbook, and we often spend our time using that textbook by reading it in class. And if you're using the teacher's manuals for many of the publishers, they're often telling you, read this section and then talk about it or answer questions. And it's just not an effective way of teaching because kids zone out. They're not listening. I have trouble following when someone else is just reading. It's not an engaging way to entertain. Imagine if you were to sit down in the evening to turn on TV, and it was just a person standing in front of the TV reading from a book. It's not very exciting. It's not very interesting. So we want to make sure that we're not using our time to read from a book, that we want to be able to either summarize what's in the book, take specific sections, or if we really are forced to read, as we're going to see in a minute, using a graphic organizer to help understand what they're reading. So they actually are doing something active. Many of you probably use some kind of a strategy that's jumping around the room, having kids read, one student read and the next student read, and you're going around the room. And so it seems like everyone's participating. But when the kids are not reading, they're not actively engaged, they're probably not paying attention. If you ask them immediately what they just read or what you just heard, it's very likely, a small percentage of them are actually going to remember what they were reading. So you want to make sure that using class time, not for reading a textbook, but for other things that are more engaging in the way that they're learning or listening or hearing what's in the actual book. So this is basically what we're getting down to. The better way of teaching is not so much lecturing, but leading. We want to go from a lecturer to a leader. We want to go from someone who's just standing in front of the room, kind of speaking, to someone who's sitting next to the student, working with them. And frankly, many of you are, like I was, very overwhelmed by teaching early on, or even later on, even now. It can be very overwhelming. If you're standing in front of the room and speaking for the whole time, it can be very, very challenging. So you want to be able to break that up with some activities that are engaging. And even the times in which you are speaking, you want to make sure that the kids are more engaged than just listening with their ears. They're using some kind of a visual way to process the information that they're learning. So the key is to be a leader, not a lecturer, not a speaker, not a reader in front of the room, but to do things that are going to get the kids absolutely engaged in the learning process instead. So here's 3 tactics that work instead. We've talked about 3 mistakes. 1 is that we speak too much. 2 is that we're using busy work that might be entertaining but not engaging, and that we're reading in class. Those are 3 things that are big mistakes that I see again and again and again in classrooms that I myself use, especially early on, because I thought that was the way to teach. And it may even seem like those are the ways to kind of take off the stress of education. But the three tactics we're going to talk about right now are actually freeing in so many ways. They free you up to be serving the kids rather than speaking to them, if you will. So the first one we mentioned a couple times, and hopefully if you watched from the very beginning of the webinar, you know that you can use graphic organizers. So I would always provide a graphic organizer. And this does add a little bit extra time. When you're preparing a lecture and you're going to speak on some topic, give the kids a graphic organizer to follow along with what you're saying. And the practice is actually incredibly helpful to organize your thoughts, because you really want to, you'll really narrow down specifically what you want to say when you're teaching to the kids. A very simple graphic organizer would just be like a fill-in-the-blank sheet of paper. So a few sentences, but that you're basically going to say that summarize what you're talking about, and then having the kids fill in the blanks by writing in some of the main ideas that you're trying to get across. So basically, a graphic organizer is a sheet of paper, a worksheet, if you will, that has a visual way of representing information. And you can use these while you're lecturing to the kids, or while they're reading from the book. Or if you're showing a video, like the religion teacher has lots of videos, and we have graphic organizers for all of those videos to help the kids learn and understand what they're listening to and watching. And this comes back to basically the science that our brains are basically made up of neurons. And I'm not a big scientist, but basically I understand this about the way that we learn, is that the way that we learn is we connect one idea to another idea. So a neuron basically would hold a certain idea, and then it connects to another neuron when you learn something new. So you're making connections for people. This is why, for example, Jesus is speaking in parables. He's making connections between what people already understand and this new idea that he wants to teach about God and the kingdom of God. So you're making those connections there. So here's some examples of some graphic organizers. A mind map, which again visually connects ideas. You have the main idea in the middle and the supporting details on the outside. That's a very simple graphic organizer that you can have the kids fill out while you're lecturing, while they're reading, whatever it might be. A KWL chart on their graphic organizer, basically, it gives them a chance to, before you start teaching, what do they know about this topic already? And then in the middle column, what do they want to know about this topic? And then at the end, you go back and you have them fill out what they learned. And sometimes you can actually write down questions in each of those columns that they can answer as they go along. Fishbone diagram, kind of similar to the mind map, is in this graphic organizer. Basically, you have the main idea in the middle, and then the supporting ideas around the outside, like in the bones of the fish, basically. Pretty simple, but again, great way for you to help students organize information. You know, the brain, I was just listening to a podcast, an interview with somebody who basically said that the brain is built into two thirds. Basically, 1/3 is used for processing visual information. 1/3 is used for processing visual information and auditory information. That kind of the combination of the two. And I can't remember what the third one is. If it's just auditory or what it is, or emotional, I don't know. But basically he was making the point that almost half of our brain is dedicated to visual processing. So it's so important to have a visual graphic organizer to help kids understand the connections between ideas. Venn diagram is another popular graphic organizer. You got two ideas, and then the way that they connect and the way that they're different, similar and different. Flowchart, of course, works as well to show the connection between ideas that are maybe one after the other. This would be great for like a timeline, series of events, whatever it might be, but kind of summarizing an event in the Bible, for example, flowchart would be a great way to do that. Okay, the second tactic that works really well is just a habit of practicing in class. So if you're going to be presenting something new, you want to spend most of the time in your class having the students practice what they've learned. Practice, practice, practice. This is why sports teams are practicing all the time. They're not spending their time in front of the chalkboard or the whiteboard working through plays. They're doing that a small amount of time. Then most of the time is spent actually going through the motions, applying what they should have learned, both the skills and the lessons learned. So the second tactic is practice. You should spend 20% of your time introducing new ideas and 80% of your time in class practicing what they've learned. And here's a lesson planning framework that we're going to come back to later on. Basically, every lesson plan, you should be presenting something new for about 20% of the time, and then practicing everything that they should, kind of showing what they have learned. Then at the end of that class, or the end of that practice session, if you will, you can check. So what do you do during that practice session? One is that you can apply, you can have worksheets, you can have activities, you can have games, whatever it might be that's going to give them the opportunity to practice. So there's some examples of things you can do during that practice phase of learning. Some creative ways, at least. You can have the kids write letters. You can write a letter from a person to person. So take the place, let's say St. Peter was going to write a letter to Jesus, or during the season of Easter, he was going to write a letter to Jesus in heaven, or whatever it might be, person to person. Right? St. Paul, what would St. Paul write a letter to Peter about? Whatever, what would a person who is preparing for confirmation, what would let's say they imagine they write a letter to to the bishop ahead of time. And you can actually do that. And you can have the person you were teaching, that you could to write a letter to another person specifically, write a letter to the priest, to the bishop, to the pope, illustrating what they've learned. Or they can take the place of somebody who is in the Bible or famous. Like, imagine Moses were to write a letter to you. What would he say to you? What would he write to you? So that's one way of practicing. If you're introducing, let's say you're going to introduce a lesson on introducing the kids to Moses, Moses could be one of those people that are either writing a letter that they can take the place of, or they could, of course, write a letter to Moses. That's something for kids, especially that are writers, people that like to write and learn that way. If you're a visual learner, or the students are visual learners, creating a cover of a book or a magazine, or a music album. They don't really have album covers these days anymore, but I guess they do online. Movie covers or movie posters. Use a visual. Their visual skills to do that. Have some examples beforehand, have examples of book covers or magazine covers, whatever it might be, and then give the students the opportunity to show what they've learned, practice what they've learned by applying it to designs. So again, I mentioned earlier, one of the mistakes we make is busy work. So rather than having the kids use their interests in the visual learning by coloring, just coloring in the lines, have them draw pictures, but for a specific purpose, creating a cover for a movie or a book or whatever it might be. If they're musically inclined, and many of your students might be, pick a familiar tune and then have the kids make up the new words to it to show what they've learned. Like Happy Birthday or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. You can have church songs, whatever it might be. They can make up their own songs, of course. You could come up with cheers, like cheers that would be chanted at a sports game. You could think of poetry and have the poet lines rhyme like in a poem, or pick a haiku. So songs and poems are a great way to get the kids to use their creative minds to apply what they've learned. And I know a lot of you do skits, and I know students that I've taught love skits. They'd like to do it every class if they could. But it's okay to spend some time doing skits to show what they've learned, because that requires them, if you're introducing a parable, if you're introducing a story from the Bible, it requires them to really understand and summarize what happened. So it's of course, it's kind of a first level of understanding, but you want them to be able to summarize, not just by writing a paragraph, which get boring doing that every time, or the kids don't like to write, many of them. Rather than giving like a short summary or teaching the class, you can have them perform what they've learned, and that's a great way to practice what the lessons that you've taught to them. Okay, the third tactic that works is centers, and a center is basically you have, rather than doing just one activity as an entire class, finishing that activity and then moving on to the next activity, where you are there in front of the entire group of, say, 20 kids. If you have centers in the room, 2 or 3, ideally 3 centers, you can have basically an activity at 3 different tables or clusters of desks in the room, and then give the students 10 minutes to work on an activity in groups or individually in groups. And then after the 10 minutes is over, you rotate to the next center. You rotate to the next center, and then you do the next activity. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most helpful things, especially for younger kids, to do in class, because it gets them moving before they lose interest in the activity that you are working on. So have them move from one center to the next, and give them a new activity. So you can have it at the centers. You could have games. You could have have them make flashcards to remember what they've learned in certain topics, certain main vocabulary words. You could have worksheets, graphic organizers to help show what they've learned or practice what they've learned, whatever it might be. But get the kids moving from station to station, 10 to 15 minutes per station. And that gives you the opportunity to move from section. So you can work with a group of, say, 7 kids as opposed to all 20, and work more one-on-one with them, help them, then move on to the next one afterwards. Okay, so centers are a great way. Here's 2 more bonus tactics. So those are, in my mind, those are the 3 most important things we should be doing as religious educators, as teachers, as catechists, is using graphic organizers, spending time practicing in class, and then finally center as a tactic. And here's two more that I find extremely helpful that I build into every lesson that I can. The first one is a hook. And those of you who have heard me speak in person know that I'm a big proponent of this tactic, which is pulled from a book by Doug Lemov about Teach Like a Champion. And basically the idea is that at the beginning of a lesson, you want to hook the student's attention. And you want to hook the student's attention by offering some kind of a metaphor that you can come back to that summarizes or helps you understand the main idea that you're trying to get across. And again, going back to how the brain works and the neurons that connect to other neurons, you learn by making connections between what you know and something new. When you have a hook at the beginning of a lesson, you can make connections back to it repeatedly throughout the lesson. So, for example, let's say you tell a story at the beginning of class that could be either a true story or a story that you kind of make up, a parable even. You could read a parable from the Gospels and then use that to teach a lesson on the sacrament of penance, for example, for the lost coin, lost sheep, or lost son. So tell a story. Or you can actually use an analogy. You can use a metaphor, and you can either verbally, or you can use a prop as a metaphor. You can, if you're going to teach a lesson on the sacrament of baptism, you can bring in water in the front of the room and then discuss the different elements of water, what it can be used for, what it feels like, and then make those connections between that and baptism. You can use media. You can show a quick little video. We often, my catechist partner and I will often find some good inspirational YouTube videos out there that we can show in class. They're going to be easy to kind of connect to and come back to as we're learning the new lessons. So it's not necessarily these hooks aren't going to actually teach an understanding of a lesson necessarily, but they're going to give you a metaphor that you can come back to again and again and again. Status as well. Status is a little bit challenging, but basically, if you were to say whatever the lesson might be, if you connected it to something, someone or something that has high status, something that like a celebrity or the Pope, for example. And then finally, a challenge might be at the beginning of class. You're going to challenge them by the end of this lesson. I want you to be able to, do X, Y, Z. And that challenge is often something that's going to keep them engaged as they're learning something new. You can constantly remind them that this is the reason why we're learning this is because you want to be able to accomplish this challenge. You want to be able to, explain to your parents X, Y, Z, whatever that challenge might be. So that's a hook. That's something at the beginning of class. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes at the beginning of class. It could be longer if you want, but it's just a couple of minutes, little hook at the beginning of class that you can come back to again and again and again. I found that this to be an incredibly great way to get the kids engaged because they want to fill in the gaps. They want to understand why that hook makes sense for the lesson that you're teaching. And the next thing, this is more important, especially for us as religious educators, is just to be a witness. Excuse me. So as a witness, we want to be able to tell our stories. You want to be able to not just explain the ideas behind what you're teaching, but show that this connects to your life and the way that you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, the way that you have a relationship with God. By telling a story of your life that's going to illustrate the point of the lesson. It's going to illustrate how you apply this to your own life, and then therefore how they can apply it to their own lives as well. So those are some kind of individual tactics that you can use. So I want to go, that's kind of more in the details. I want to take a step back and think about lesson planning in general. So to do some review quickly, the 3 mistakes are that we speak too much, we lecture too much in class, that we often assign busy work like coloring sheets that might be interesting in keeping the kids quiet, but aren't necessarily going to get them engaged and learning something new about their faith, about their relationship with God. The third mistake that we often make is just reading the textbook in class, not engaging. But 3 ways that we can get the kids engaged are: 1, using graphic organizers in which they can be actively listening, actively reading the textbook, to visually show connections to different ideas. They can practice. 80% of your time in class should be spent on practicing what they've learned, not presenting new ideas. So that's things like writing letters, creating, using their artistic abilities to create book covers, whatever kind of creative thing you might have come up with or found to be best in that lesson. Just tap into their creative minds to use those activities that are going to keep them engaged. And you can do those things. The practice session can be used for centers. Centers can be your practice. You can have centers. This is what we do in our lesson plans. We have a section in the lesson plan that says practice, and there's 3 bullet points for each of the 3 centers when we have time to do that. So now let's apply that to lesson planning. Big picture, planning for engagement. Let's say you've got 3 activities planned or 3 centers, and you all want those activities to point to one goal. So rather than just doing a series of activities that are going to more or less touch on the different topics in the chapter that you're supposed to be teaching on this week, instead, take the chapter that you've learned. The process I use, if you read the Religion Teacher's lesson planning ebook, this is kind of the process I suggest. Is basically first you take notes on the main ideas. You just basically take the textbook, you read it, jot down the notes of the main ideas, and then you start to focus on what's the most important. You would turn them into SWIBOTs, which is our students will be able to. These are objectives, because you want to teach with the end in mind. You want to think about, what do I want to see at the end of this lesson my students be doing? What do I want them to be able to say about what they've learned? So teach with the finish line in mind. Teach with the end in mind. Recognize, what do I want to happen at the end? And then you can work backwards and plan those activities that are not just busy work, but that are actually going to accomplish the goal that you set for the kids. So in the middle of this lesson planning framework, if you will, is the goal, is the objective, is the target you want to reach. And on the outside, getting closer to that target, we have 3 things that we can do. We can present new ideas. And again, when you're lecturing, when you are showing a video in class, like the ones the religion teacher has, when you are reading from the textbook, please provide a graphic organizer for the students to follow along with, because it's going to give them the opportunity to actively listen as opposed to just sit quietly and try to pay attention. It gives them something to do. And it frees you up to focus on the teaching itself and the main ideas, because you only want them to understand the main ideas. They can come back and learn the details and fill in the gaps later during this practice section. So 20% is presenting, 80% of the class should be spent practicing, doing creative activities, using centers, and using worksheets that are not just worksheets like busy work, but worksheets that are going to require them to show what they have learned or try to remember what they have learned, reference their graphic organizer or their notes to be able to apply what they've learned. So you're practicing with a number of different activities, again, all going back to that main objective, that main goal. And then you want to check to make sure that they've understood what you're trying to teach. So at the end of the lesson, you're going to do a quick, you call it assessment, but basically you just want to be able to check, did they learn what I want them to learn? Am I seeing at the end of the class what I set out to see in the objective? Can the students say what I want them to be able to say about this topic? If not, then go back and present it again. Go back and point out the key main idea that's most important in the lesson. So I wanted to give a few examples here to kind of bring it all together. So show some examples of how this applies to an actual lesson plan. This idea of we're presenting something new, and then we're going to practice and we're going to check. So here's a lesson on basically a summary of a lesson plan on the Sacrament of Reconciliation. The goals might be, or the objectives might be, the students will be able to, SWIBOT, feel comfortable going to confession. This is something I've done, more recently in my career. Started having lesson objectives that are about what I want students to feel, not just know, because it's important that we want them to feel comfortable. For example, going to confession, not just that they know about it, but that they can feel comfortable going. And so students will be able to feel comfortable. Students will be able to go to do a thorough examination of conscience. Those are my objectives. So what do I want to fill in for the lesson plan itself? Well, there's going to be some section that's going to be the presentation section. They're going to learn something new from me. I'm going to help them make connections between what they already know and what something new, some new idea. And so I can give them and explain examination of conscience. So I can actually have them holding their hands an examination of conscience. And so then rather than I'm lecturing with the PowerPoint on what's an examination of conscience, I can present by giving them an examination of conscience and pointing out what it is, explaining how I would use it if I were to go through an examination of conscience myself. So they have something they can hold in their hands. And then the next thing we would go through the steps of the reconciliation. So I might present by having a PowerPoint of the steps of reconciliation, of course, maybe even with pictures. But what I'm going to have the students do while I'm going through those steps is have them filling out or maybe drawing those steps in their graphic organizer as we're going through each one. So by drawing little icons that go along with each step, they're using a different part of their brain to really help understand the different parts. But we don't want them to just understand it on paper. We want them to be able to do it in class as well. So we're going to practice going to confession. This is something that I've done with my students, my first or second graders, is that, having them actually practice with you going to confession makes a huge difference, because, rather than just try to remember what you told them they're supposed to say, they can actually say what they're supposed to say. They can actually go through and practice going to confession. And that's critical, because that's what's going to meet that objective that we said at the beginning. We want them to feel comfortable going to confession. Therefore, the only way to do that is actually have them practice going to confession. Actually go through do the confession themselves. The next thing, we can have them actually do a little journal. Have them journal an examination of conscience. That's going to help them do a thorough examination of conscience leading up to their confession, their reconciliation. But just give them a journal to actually do it. There's no reason to just talk about examination of consciences and what it is. Give them the opportunity to practice doing it. Pick a few questions for them. Have them journal about those questions. And you don't have to actually go to confession to do an examination of conscience. And you can do at the end a quick little prayer service. It might even give that students the opportunity to feel a little that forgiveness of God after doing that examination of conscience. And again, the last thing, the check, I'm a big believer that assessment doesn't have to be like a quiz or a test. One of the best ways to check to make sure that they've met those two objectives of feeling comfortable and doing a thorough examination of conscience is simply to just observe and look for those things during that penance service that you might have as a group. Watch, how are they doing? Are they comfortable going to confession? Are they doing a thorough examination of conscience, etc.? So another lesson might be on saints and confirmation. So let's say you're teaching confirmation and you want the students to be able to pick a saint that connects with their to pick a saint and connects with their confirmation journey. Sorry, I'm just checking the comments to make sure things are okay. People are watching it. Everything. So they can pick a, so they can pick a saint, of course, like we normally do for confirmation, and connect it to confirmation. The objective might be, the goal might be the students will be able to explain how the saints help us on our confirmation journey. So that goal we could maybe present in this way: talk about the importance of names, birth, baptism, confirmation. Give some examples of ways in which we can, you might have. I apologize if you're having trouble hearing me. We're getting our kitchen renovated upstairs. It's been quite a day. And I apologize if you're watching a recording of this and not the actual event. So the way we might present, of course, is to talk about opportunities in which names are picked. Someone's born, someone's baptized, someone's confirmed. They might, if they're a graphic organizer, they might just have 3 boxes, and they fill in the boxes as you're talking about those 3 opportunities to pick names. Where do you find information about the saints? You can certainly pull up on the website websites that you can find information about the saints. Pick some of those that there are kind of the go-to resources that you can use. Send to the parents to be able to have the kids do research as well. You can also do a little kind of lecture about how the saints pray for us, and not so much that misunderstanding of the way we pray to saints, but how the saints can pray for us. And by picking a confirmation saint, you're picking someone who is going to be able to pray for you. And you could do for the practice. I didn't have this down here, but you could do a little litany of the saints. Say the saint's name, just pray for us. Pick some of the names of the kids in the class and just say, pray for us as you're praying through. The practice might be to actually have them do some research in class or have them do research at home. The common practice is to write papers about the saints that they've picked or to do presentations about them. Those are ways that they're practicing what they've learned. You give them the opportunity to practice what they've learned. If you're doing saint research, I would always give them a graphic organizer, and that could be simply 5 questions to answer as they're doing the research. Otherwise, all you're going to get is a copy and paste job from these websites that you introduce them to, right? And then finally, the check might be basically just a conversation. Why did you pick the saint the saint. Set aside their presentation, their research presentation of their paper, but just ask them more in more of a casual way. Why did you pick the saint? That's going to help them hopefully explain how the saint helps them on their confirmation journey. So if their answer is, well, because it's my brother's name or something like that, or it's my middle name, you say, well, okay, what is it about them that's going to help you on your confirmation journey, or help you after you're confirmed, and help challenge them to really be able to explain those things. Good Shepherd lesson. The objectives might be to explain why Jesus is good and a shepherd. So those are two important things. So what is it that makes him good, and what is it that makes Jesus a shepherd? He talks about himself as a shepherd often in the Gospels. Show gratitude to Christ as the good shepherd would be another objective you might have. And the presentation might be to show or discuss the Good Shepherd statue. You can show a picture of it, or you could bring one in if you have one in the class or the school or the parish, and just talk about, observe the statue and tell me what you see. What is this person doing? Why do you think he's doing that? Then actually maybe read the parable. And again, going back to the graphic organizer idea, is about while you're reading the parable, have the students filling something out that's going to either maybe fill in the blanks to passages that they're reading, or questions that are going to answer, whatever it might be. Be able to present these things by giving the kids something active to be able to do. And you can practice by giving them Good Shepherd worksheets. Make them one yourself to kind of summarize the main ideas that you wanted to say. The religion teacher has a worksheet on Good Shepherd as well. You can draw pictures of the parables. So read the parables from the Good Shepherd and then draw pictures of them. And then maybe even a thank you note to Jesus for being the Good Shepherd, and then finally maybe a verbal check as well. Do a quick little verbal check on asking the kids questions that you want them to be able to answer about the Good Shepherd, raising of hands, or maybe just saying out loud what they should be able to know. Again, I apologize for the noise if you hear that in the background. Maybe we'll do one more real quickly about the Assumption of Mary. The objectives might be students will be able to distinguish between the Ascension and the Assumption. Another goal might be be able to explain why Mary is assumed into heaven. Give them a graphic organizer, give them a Venn diagram with the Ascension and the Assumption. You can fill it out with them as the way that you're lecturing. Show an icon of Mary and discuss what this says about Mary, who is the Queen of Heaven, whatever it might be. There's some great quotes from JP2 about the Assumption or the Ascension. JP2 loves Mary just like Jesus loves Mary, to be able to kind of present those ideas and new ideas. And then for practicing, give them another Venn diagram and have them fill it out again, or fill in the blanks of different ideas to remember what they learned. Or maybe they draw pictures instead of writing to help summarize what they learned about during that presentation part. You can do a scavenger hunt in the Bible to find passages about Mary. And you can certainly have a worksheet about the Assumption. Google that or find one from the religion teacher. I'm a big fan of exit cards. Exit cards are basically just note cards that you can kids can quickly answer questions on and then give to you that you can check quickly. On the one side, if it says you can have the Ascension, on the other side of the Assumption, they just have them either draw a picture and you just look, is it a picture of Jesus for the Ascension? Is it a picture of Mary for the Assumption? That would be a key thing to look at for those pictures, or have them write out a summary, a memory of what they have done. Okay, again, I really apologize for all of you who are just watching the recording. I know that the numbers are pretty small viewing right now live, because I know just as I'm looking right now in my email inbox, some people are having trouble accessing it. So we'll make sure we'll send the recording out. If you're watching live, I thank you. And if you're not, we'll make sure and get this to you later on today. And I apologize for the noise as well. There's two places where you might be viewing this. One is on the religion teacher website itself. In the comments, I'll check there first, or you might be adding comments in the YouTube live chat. Certainly you can ask questions there. If not, I understand. So if you feel free to ask questions there. If not, I'll wait for a moment here. If not, we'll get close to wrapping things up. All right, I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I will wrap up today's webinar. Like I said, this has been quite a learning experience with technical difficulties. I apologize for all of you who had this planned out and weren't able to access it. Yeah, Google and YouTube made some changes, and I should have been aware of those and practiced this morning instead of trying to just expect things to be the same way they were a month ago. Before we finish up, if you're watching this on the Religion Teacher recording page or the Religion Teacher website, right below there's a link to learn more about the membership site that we have. And what I've tried to do is provide practical tools that are going to help you keep the students engaged. There are more than 150 graphic organizers worksheets right now for topics from scripture to sacraments to saints, all kinds of different topics, and we're adding more every week. There's a graphic organizer and a worksheet basically for every gospel reading. So every weekly reading, there is a worksheet for all of the readings going back to each of the 3 cycles of the year. So we'll finish up this liturgical year, but there will be a gospel worksheet for every gospel of all 3 years in the Religion Teacher membership site. There's more than 40 class videos. We'll be adding more and more of those next month. You will see we're going to launch a whole set of resources for Catholic social teaching. So I'm really excited about that. There's some videos that are going to be posted and a number of worksheets as well. There's multiple online courses to help you, improve a little bit more. Expanding on all the topics we talked about today, there's a whole course on classroom engagement that you can find, a course on engaging parents, on evangelization based on what Pope Francis has written. There's a bunch of different of courses that you can take online to learn more about, being your best self as a religious educator. But I'm offering a little special offer for anybody that took some time out to watch the recording or to be able to be here live today in this webinar. The special offer only for webinar participants from now until tomorrow. So anybody that joins the Religion Teacher as an annual member, I'll send you a signed copy of 31 Days to Becoming a Better Religious Educator, the Catholic Mass PowerPoint game, and then you'll be able to participate in the rapid fire lesson planning. So basically, all you have to do is send me an email or post a comment on this special page we'll send to you later on this maybe next week, that basically will create a lesson plan for you, just like we saw a minute ago. Basically, I'll give you some ideas. Here's some objectives to do. Here's where you can present it. Here's how they can practice, and here's how to check. So that's the actual membership itself per year for individuals, if it's just you, is $49.99 per year. If it's an entire parish or school, it's $179.99 per year. So this is a better deal than the monthly payments which are available, because you get basically the summers off. So I know it's getting close to the end of summer, but if you join as an annual member, you basically get the summers free by reducing those payments. You're basically getting 10 payments instead of 1. But it's all one payment, $49.99 or $179.99. And if you do that by the end of tomorrow, we'll send an email with some more details later on. If you do that by the end of tomorrow, you'll be able to get these 3 bonuses. If you're already an annual member, that's great. Just let me know. You should have, if you've joined in the last year, you probably had already taken advantage of a similar offer. If you're just a member, a monthly member, you can upgrade to an annual membership and get those bonuses today as well. Just to go ahead and upgrade and let me know, and we'll make sure that you get included, and that we'll cancel the monthly payment afterwards. So feel free to do that. The link is below the this recording or this webinar. Just it says learn more. Click on that link, or here's the actual direct link if you want to go to members.religionteacher.com/042017-webinar. Like I said, click on the link below, and I'll have an email with links to it as well if you're interested in joining. Like I said, lots of bonuses. It's just for webinar participants right now. Nobody else is getting this offer. Got to be here watching or watch the recording. I hope it'll be a benefit to you. A lot of people are using this Catholic Mass PowerPoint we have this year at the end of the year. It's a great way to get the kids kind of learning the prayers of the Mass. And the 31 Days book has been really popular. It's sold more than 10,000 copies in the last few years. It's become a really important tool for a lot of people who are catechists and religion teachers. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining in today. So sorry for the technical challenges. I really apologize. It's a learning experience, and I will learn from it. We'll offer some better opportunities for professional development in the future without hopefully the technical challenges that we had today. So God bless everybody. We will talk to you soon.